Hello and welcome along to another EFL Manager special from the Honest Football Podcast. It's Sunday afternoon and we've got a surprise. Maybe not so much in terms of the timing when you look into it, but I guess this morning none of us expected Preston North End to sack their manager Alex Neil after quite a long stint in charge. The summer of 2017. It's a long time by Championship standards. So I'm joined by Charlie Betts as always to talk through it. And Charlie, we have to start with Alex Neil because there's a few concerns we've raised throughout the season at different points. But I guess your initial reaction, do you think the timing's right given the poor run they're on? Or do you feel that he's been disserviced slightly?
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to get relegated. They're obviously not going to get promoted. It's just, I mean, it is mid-table mediocrity, but I'm sure we'll talk about it in a bit. But their transfer window was sort of set up for that, really. So, the windows that they've had, I think it's harsh. It's one year where maybe they haven't quite delivered, but he's done so much there. He's done such great work. Maybe he wants a new challenge, I don't know. But it does seem a very odd time of the year to do it, very odd time in the season. But then he's not going to get a job elsewhere between now and the end of the season. I'll be amazed if he does. So it seems a very odd decision in terms of timing. Maybe over the summer I can understand possibly going in a new direction, but I don't know who or what's going to come in now and make any difference, really.
No, and I guess we sort of had this situation last year at Bristol City at the same time, and it didn't really work out that well for them. So it is interesting to see how it goes. All I can say from the statement is it looks like a sacking. It's the club saying they've parted ways with Alex Neil, which is a bit of a surprise to me. I guess he has done a good job there, like you've mentioned, and given budget-wise, forget the size of the club, because there's a lot of big clubs that have been struggling because they haven't invested, poor ownership, whatever else. But despite the job he's done here, they are on a poor run. 1 win in 9. They obviously lost to Luton Town yesterday. They're one of the few teams I've seen live this season at Kenilworth Road in a reverse fixture, and it didn't look great there. So can you sort of understand it from a chairman point of view, with them sliding down the league, that perhaps there's just that little tiny edge of panic?
I say sliding down. I mean, let's be brutally honest. The stars would really have to align for them to get relegated. I mean, you're talking about, I appreciate there's sliding down and then there's getting relegated. At this stage of the season, given everything that's happened in terms of coronavirus, it's obvious what's happened. The financial implications of empty stadium and stuff. The point I'm getting at is it seems odd to then have to pay off a manager that probably didn't need to pay off as well. You know what I mean? Because there will be, don't like talking about money, but that has to be a remuneration for his work as well. So I can see they're on the slide, but then is it the manager's fault, really? I mean, they sold their best centre-half to Liverpool, didn't replace him on the last day of the window, shot themselves in the foot, basically. That's just an example. I mean, I think they let go of 12 players between last July and now, and then he got money for 3 of them. It's not amazing business from them. And what I mean by that is that his fault? How much say does he have over this? So if they're on the slide and the chairman thinks, okay, maybe it's the right time to do it. Is it the manager who needs to go? Is he the piece of the jigsaw that's not lining up? It doesn't sound like that to me when you look at the work they've had to do. But I'm sure we'll get onto that bit in a minute.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about that because sort of the fan frustration in recent years has been the fact that they've often been in playoff contention and then slid later on in the season. And I guess this one's been no different to an extent. But as you mentioned, this season themselves, we talked about it in the January transfer review. They replaced nearly half the first team in the January transfer window, which was never going to lead to stability. Over the past 5 years, they've actually got the 19th highest net transfer spend in the Championship of the current 24 teams. So you could argue that with all of that information, Alex Neil has probably been overperforming, and now is just having one season where he's matching expectations rather than exceeding them, and he's being punished for it.
Absolutely. And the thing is as well, you're talking about, like we say, I'm not going to use the word that everyone uses about the coronavirus in terms of, but it is a very different time for everyone. And I just think actually stability is what you need. You don't need this upheaval. Like you say, they've had enough upheaval as it is with the players. I just think that he is a very, very good manager, very talented, and he's worked in very tough conditions and probably is not getting the credit he deserves for that from the board. The fans, I think, from the snapshot we've seen just before, because obviously it's literally just been announced, are very gutted by this and are very disappointed to see him go. But I think maybe he hasn't got the respect and the credit he deserves for what the conditions he's had to work in from the board, and he's sort of paying the price for something that I personally believe wasn't his fault, really. I don't know how much control he's had over all of this.
Yeah, and I think if we link it back to something that happened with Birmingham a few weeks ago, and there's been plenty more earlier in the season, perhaps the ownership of the club, and actually I think the fans have been very fair in this instance, whereas in some other instances perhaps that's not been possible. But in terms of off the pitch, the ownership and things like that, are they perhaps mixing up Preston, the size of the football club, to Preston, the size of the resources that they're giving the manager at the moment?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the thing is, you've got to think about the journey that Preston have been on. They're in League One not too long ago. There was the days of them being down there and stuff like that. And admittedly, you go back even further, they were nearly a Premier League club. So you have to match your ambitions. We say there's a lot about expectations, with clubs. And I think thing is, size of the club nowadays counts for a diddly squat, in my opinion. You know, in the sense of you've only got to look at, you support Luton Town and what they've achieved, the resources they've got. And I don't think it's the way it used to be back in our days when we were growing up. And it's like big club always does big things. It's not like that now. There's so much more off the pitch. Whether it be social media and all this. I'm sort of going off a tangent. What I mean is how do you define a big club now? Big ground doesn't necessarily mean a big club because there's no one in it. It's all about what's going on the pitch. And actually, if you're selling players left, right, and centre, or loaning in players for no, you're not getting any sell-on value. It financially doesn't make sense. So of course, it's going to be difficult then to recuperate that. So are they a big club? They're not behaving like one. They're certainly not acting like one.
I mean, talking about Alex Neil's time again, and one of the further examples of that is, yes, they're a big club, but the ownership, again, have sort of made them a selling club, which I guess a lot of clubs are at this level. But, as soon as they've had star players, so Jordan Hugill, who well, went to West Ham, went for massive money when he was doing well at Preston. Callum Robinson, he went off when he was doing well at Preston as well. He's two of many. You've mentioned Ben Davies this season already as well. As a manager, is there a time where eventually you can't just keep going in that cycle and replicating the same success? Because you're not always going to strike gold with the replacements when they're coming from the lower leagues and they're sort of lower reputation signings to start with.
Yeah, it is a lottery, and I think Preston have paid the price for that. And you've got to understand they're obviously not the only club doing that. They're not the only club dipping into the lower leagues and trying to pull out a diamond. So it is a lottery, but I just think I think this is where we've used a lot. It's not a sustainable model. You're going to have moments where it works and you could be in and around the playoffs and there's a good chance of getting up. And then you're going to have seasons like this. And you just have to accept that if this is our model and this is the way we're going to operate, then we're going to have seasons like this. Is it nice? Is it enjoyable to have, beginning of the season, if you remember, they couldn't buy a win at home, but were unbeatable away, weren't they? Yeah. So do you know what I mean? You're going to have inconsistency if you run the club inconsistently, and that's your approach. And there's nothing wrong with that because, they're going to survive. There's nothing wrong with that. But you just then can't be upset that we haven't got that stable, why are we not in and around the top six every year? Well, if you are going to be that kind of club who's selling and, like that, it's never, you're not going to get that stability. So I'd be a bit confused if that's their approach, because if that's your business model, fine, but you can't be in around that top six every year, because if you're selling your best players and replacing the ones who aren't as good, of course it's not going to happen, is it?
Yeah, and obviously we have got to talk about the other side of that. We try to have a balanced debate, but in recent games, they have performed poorly on the pitch. And Alex Neil obviously will have to take some responsibility for that. I think the fans' reaction initially in the first 15 minutes or so on social media and on forums and things really sums it up, which is, thank you for doing a really good job for us. Thank you for being part of a sustainable club for us. But perhaps this might be the right time in some people's views, which is fair enough. But I think overall, before we move on to who might be the new man, I think we've got to sum up with, he's done a pretty good job overall at Preston, regardless of how it finished, hasn't he?
Oh, yeah, definitely. You can't mock anything that he's done. I mean, even his record against in Lancashire derbies alone is so impressive. It'd be worth keeping for that. Do you know what I mean? And there's been some big wins. There was, they beat Forest last season, I think 1-0 when Forest were flying at that point. Tactically, he's a very astute manager, and I think he's got some big results out of them. Personally, was it maybe a time for him to go in a different direction, him and the club possibly? Was it right now the best time? No, I would have probably gone the end of the season. So, yeah, he'll be remembered fondly, and rightly so. I think from Preston's point of view, I think they've just lost a very talented manager who's very early on in his career and maybe wanted a bit more longevity there. But, obviously it hasn't happened. So on that basis, yeah, I think he'll always be remembered as a highlight. It maybe just ended slightly sourly. And as I say, the erratic home and away form this year, as for us as predictors, hasn't been easy. So am I glad to see the back of him? No, but in a little bit, yes, because it has made maybe our predictions a little bit easier.
Yeah, it probably cost us 2 more points than any this season. But we've got to talk about the next man, because this appointment is going to be very important. Now, we probably don't know whether it's going to be immediate or the summer, because it might well be interim to the end of the season, knowing that there's probably unlikely they're going to go up or down. But let's have a very quick look after half an hour at who the favourites are for the job. And the top of the list, because you won't know this yet, is Neil Harris, who obviously left Cardiff recently. Not far behind that, with the current assistant, is Eddie Howe, Neil Lennon, Derek McInnes, so a couple coming from Scotland, which obviously just follows the pattern. Yeah. Gareth Ainsworth and Michael Appleton, who always seems to be up there. And then we've got the usual likes of Darren Ferguson, Tony Pulis, Daniel Stendhal, who have all been linked with the last few. And your favourite man, Kenny Jackett and Ryan Lowe, not far below that. So there's plenty of names in the hat already. Different sort of qualities, different last jobs, different statures in the game, even going a bit further down to the likes of Chris Wilder and Chris Coleman. So who do you think would be a good fit for Preston moving forward? Who do you think might be the next man? And realistically, what are they actually going to get?
It's tough. I think, as you say about Neil Harris being the favourite, I think it's a very different style of play to Alex Neil and what they're playing at the minute. And that's one thing that you have to think about is, yes, they've had a massive turnover of a squad. Are they going to do that again? So if they do bring in Neil Harris, are they going to bring in a different type of player? They've done it in January. Why not? I think it's tough. I personally, I think Derek McInnes, like you mentioned, at Aberdeen, he plays, decent football at Aberdeen. He worked in those sort of conditions where not necessarily being one of the biggest clubs in the league, but still a massive institution. Aberdeen, there's no beating around the bush. Aberdeen are not one of the old firm, but still a huge club in Scotland. So he can manage that expectation, but it's not quite going to be the best team in the league. And I think that maybe would be better suited to him. I think Neil Lennon, for everything having at Celtic, his time at Bolton probably won't do him any favours in terms of getting a job at Preston. So, I mean, in terms of pinning the name now, it's so early on, it's a bit hard. I think someone who plays a similar style of football, I would say someone like a Derek McInnes, or possibly someone from the lower leagues. But this, out of all the ones we've done, I think is probably one of the harder ones to predict because, you talk about a man who's been at a club for 3 or 4 years and it's really set up a foundation there. Are they going to go in the same direction and bring in a similar manager style of play? Or are they going to go the opposite direction and go, complete direct football and that kind of thing? So I don't know. For me, I personally would like to stick with what Alex Neil has done. But again, it's going to be similar issues off the pitch if that's, whoever comes in terms of stability of players and turnover of players. I don't know. Personally, I'd stick with that because I think it worked for him up to this season. But for me, so someone like Derek McInnes possibly.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that's the thing that Preston fans, again, in their initial reaction, seem to be most worried about is perhaps, are they going to invest in getting someone, or as they deem it, a proper manager in, or are they going to stick with a cheap option for as long as possible? Again, going back to Bristol City this time last year, they took that approach. And as it stands, it hasn't worked out because they're in a very similar position now. But we'll wait and see on that front. I guess the one thing we have got to say is, given the fact that Alex Neil was given nearly 4 seasons, and given the fact that half of the players they bought in January in their big overhaul of squad are on loan, whoever comes in the summer, they are going to have a chance to rejuvenate the squad a bit. And they're surely going to be given time to do that, you would presume.
Yeah, I think so. But that's why I think this is such a crucial appointment. That's why I don't understand why they've sacked him now. Is really, I would like to think surely you're going to have a bigger pool of managers to choose from in the summer. Come the end of the season, there's going to be managers who are going into contracts, etc. So on that basis, I'll take, for example, someone like a Michael Appleton, who's doing really well at Lincoln. The wheels might come off at Lincoln, they don't get promoted. Suddenly, then that's a good job for him. He's not going to leave now. He's on the verge of potentially automatic promotion. So the point I'm getting at is that I think it's an odd time. So I think they'll probably interim up to the end of the season. And then, like you say, whoever comes in, given previous form, will be given a good shot at it. But my only caveat to that, as somebody who would potentially be coming in, is the expectation going to be reasonable? And am I then going to be sort of lambasted for it if we don't quite make the top 3? Do you know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I completely understand it. And it's a fair concern, really, because I guess as we talk about with the investment in recent years, Preston can't expect to be competing with the top 6. And I don't think the fans do expect it with the current squad they've got. I think there's the frustration there that perhaps when they had a good manager in Alex Neil, they haven't been back to that level. And are they going to attract a top one if they can't promise that? I'm not quite sure. So I think you're right. It's a bit of a crossroads for Preston. I'm not sure where they're going to go from here. The timing's a little bit odd, albeit I can understand it to an extent. But I think we have to look for the future. I'm going to ask you, obviously, as we always do in these championship sacking ones, who do you think the next man will be if I have to pin you to one name? And do you think next season they're going to be able to achieve something at Preston? Whereabouts do you see them finishing next year?
I'll give you 2. I think I'll have to give you 2 because I can't split between them in the sense that I think if you're going to appoint someone now, it would be someone like a Derek McInnes who's out of work. If they enter into the end of the season, that opens a whole new ball game, really. And then you're looking at someone in maybe League One who doesn't quite get there through the playoffs. Right, neck on the line, Derek McInnes in the summer, but possibly a Michael Appleton or something like that. I think they'll be fine. I think they'll float in mid-table their following year because I think, like you say, it is a build job. I don't know. Normally, I end up saying, they'll be in mid-table next year and then they'll hit the playoffs the year after. I don't know. That championship's such a tough league, and it does require a quite a heavy investment, and also someone who's going to be back that I don't know they're going to get. If the manager comes in, is going to get full backing on that. So on that basis, I think it'd be more of the same, mid-table, possibly top half here and there. But I can't see them making the playoffs the next couple of years.
No, fair enough. I guess what we've got to say is that the fans in their initial reaction have been very fair with their assessment of Alex Neil, even if they're not sure he's the right man now, be given the time and the run they've been on recently. But the reaction seems to have been a very honest one. And I'm kind of in agreement with you. I'm very surprised, having not discussed this before, that you didn't throw Ryan Lowe out, because I was so sure that was going to happen at the start of this episode. But I kind of agree with you. I can see it being someone out of work for financial reasons. And obviously, we've mentioned we don't know what the effect the pandemic is going to be on a lot of clubs. And we don't know how quickly all the fans are going to be back in the stadium. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go next year. The name I had before was Derek McInnes, but I don't really want to agree with you, just in case it's somebody different. So I'm going to stick my neck on the line and say that they go for Neil Harris. He's been chucked in as the favourite. So let's see what happens. But it's going to be an interesting one and certainly a very important one for Preston North End. I don't think it'll be to the end of the season, though, like you. But that's all from this episode. If you did enjoy it, please do put a thumbs up on the video. If you're a Preston fan, of course, let us know down in the comments what you think of Alex Neil's tenure as a whole. And do you think it was the right time to let him go? And do you have the same concerns behind the scenes in terms of the board, investment, and giving the manager the best chance possible to try and push for the playoffs in future? If you haven't already, subscribe down below for regular content from the podcast, including Championship matchday predictions every single week. Thank you to Charlie for joining me as always. You can follow us over on Twitter @HonestFootball3, and hopefully we'll see you next time.